To offset this growing perception of internal weakness and fear, Iranian officials escalated their public rhetoric even further, going on state television to threaten a large-scale ground invasion aimed at capturing American personnel stationed nearby in the region. But this kind of aggressive talk runs directly into an unavoidable geographic reality that no amount of rhetoric can overcome. Iran does not share a land border with the country these specific threats were aimed at. Any serious ground invasion would require armored columns to move through a vast, completely exposed stretch of southern Iraqi desert, terrain offering almost no natural cover for advancing vehicles. If Iranian forces genuinely attempted something like that, what would await them wouldn't resemble a conventional battle in any traditional sense. It would be an extremely one-sided confrontation from the very first hour. There are reportedly more than 13,000 American troops stationed on high alert in the immediate region, with over 50,000 spread across the broader Middle East, backed by expeditionary forces, airborne units, fighter squadrons, drone fleets, and carrier strike groups, all positioned and fully ready to respond immediately to any serious escalation attempt. The deeper strategic reality underlying all of this is fairly simple once you break it down. An individual soldier standing on the ground in this kind of conflict is never truly alone anymore. He's not walking into a traditional, trench-style confrontation the way soldiers might have decades ago. He's simply the visible edge of a much larger, satellite-connected system working silently behind him. If Iranian armor were to cross toward contested territory, satellites would detect the heat signature almost instantly, and artificial intelligence would calculate the most efficient response route within mere seconds. Precision-guided missile systems, integrated directly with strike aircraft already patrolling. The desert skies above could eliminate that target in a matter of moments. In many realistic scenarios, an advancing vehicle would be functionally neutralized before it even completed its first maneuver forward. This is what total dominance through air and technological superiority actually looks like when applied in practice, not just in theory. And this conflict hasn't stayed neatly confined to the region it started in. It has started reaching much further than anyone initially expected when the tension first began building weeks earlier. In Russia, hypersonic missile development has reportedly accelerated Ukraine's own efforts to build stronger missile defense systems, showing just how interconnected these seemingly separate conflicts have quietly become over time. But the single moment that truly caught global attention, the moment that made people outside the region suddenly pay close attention, happened much closer to home than anyone expected. On that same tense night of heavy strikes overseas, air traffic control at LaGuardia Airport in New York issued an emergency alert that startled observers watching from around the world. Intercepted communications reportedly captured air traffic controllers warning an incoming commercial flight during its final approach, alerting the flight crew to a possible man-portable air defense system threat detected near the airport, urging extreme caution during landing procedures. These portable, shoulder-launched missile systems are historically associated with state-sponsored terrorist networks, including groups linked directly to Iranian funding channels over the years. A large commercial aircraft, landing gear already lowered, mere minutes from touching down safely, has virtually no ability to perform evasive maneuvers at that stage of flight. In that moment, it effectively becomes a stationary defenseless target hanging in the sky. Port Authority teams reportedly searched the surrounding area thoroughly and later declared the threat not credible after several hours of investigation. But the psychological impact of that moment, however brief, was undeniable to anyone watching it unfold in real time. It showed how modern conflicts don't stay confined to distant battlefields the way they once did. They test the nerves of major cities thousands of miles away, probing quietly for reactions, probing for hidden weaknesses in systems people assumed were untouchable. And this raises an important question genuinely worth sitting with for a moment. If threats like this can reach as far as American airspace over one of its busiest cities, even briefly, what does that suggest about how forcefully the response inside the Persian Gulf itself might escalate over the days and weeks still ahead? Let's take a breath here and step back from the immediate chaos for a moment, because understanding the deeper, underlying pattern matters far more than reacting to any single headline in isolation. This entire situation reflects something much larger than one region or one particularly tense week of conflict. It reflects a fundamental shift in how modern military power actually operates today compared to just a decade ago. Technology has become just as decisive as raw manpower, and in many cases, arguably even more so. Drones scout ahead of human pilots into environments too dangerous to risk a life. Satellites detect movement long before soldiers on the ground ever see it with their own eyes. Artificial intelligence calculates likely outcomes faster than any human mind possibly could under pressure. This is precisely why Iran's initial confidence collapsed so quickly once real confrontation actually began in earnest. They were operating under assumptions built on older, outdated models of warfare, models where sheer numbers and confident rhetoric could reliably intimidate an opponent into hesitation or retreat. But modern conflict simply doesn't work that way anymore and hasn't for some time now. Precision, speed, and total information dominance now decide outcomes long before traditional combat even formally begins on any battlefield. At the same time, this entire situation reveals something genuinely uncomfortable about just how fragile stability really is throughout this region. One miscalculation, one missile fired at the wrong ship in the wrong strait, one moment of overconfidence from military planners can trigger consequences that ripple outward far beyond the immediate area of conflict. A strike near a nuclear facility that could have gone catastrophically wrong. Threats reaching commercial airspace thousands of miles away from the original conflict zone. Ground invasions threatened against geographic realities that make them nearly impossible to execute successfully in any practical sense. Every piece of this unfolding story reflects decisions made under enormous pressure, with enormous, sometimes irreversible consequences, attached to even the smallest miscalculation. And there's a deeper, more human layer running underneath all of this too, one that often gets lost in the technical details. While military strategy and advanced weapons systems dominate the headlines and the analysis, ordinary people are the ones actually absorbing the real consequences of these decisions. Sailors injured without warning in the Strait of Hormuz, simply doing their jobs. Civilians living under a regime willing to enforce harsh internal punishment while simultaneously projecting strength outward to the world. Passengers on a commercial flight who had absolutely no idea their routine descent into New York had briefly become part of a much larger geopolitical flashpoint unfolding thousands of miles away. These are the quiet, often overlooked human costs that rarely make it into the loudest, most sensational parts of the conversation surrounding this conflict. So where does all of this actually leave things moving forward from here? The rules of engagement throughout this region have clearly and permanently shifted in a significant way. What might have once been treated as an isolated, contained incident now carries the very real risk of triggering much larger, disproportionate retaliation. Infrastructure itself, not just traditional military targets, has become part of the strategic equation in ways it wasn't before. And the technology enabling all of this, from AI-guided reconnaissance drones to satellite-directed radar systems working in real time, continues to evolve at a pace that makes predicting the next move increasingly difficult, even for experienced analysts. What remains genuinely clear, even amid all this uncertainty, is this. The old assumptions about how these regional conflicts typically unfold no longer reliably apply in this new environment. A single miscalculation at sea led directly to consequences reaching thousands of miles away, into airspace, far removed from any traditional battlefield or conflict zone. And that unexpected connection between one struck vessel in a narrow strait and one brief moment of genuine fear inside a busy New York airport says everything you really need to understand about how small and interconnected the world has actually become when it comes to modern conflict and its far-reaching consequences. If this story helped you understand something you hadn't fully considered before watching this video, don't let it end here without taking action. Type the word vigilance down in the comments if you genuinely believe. Technology, not just raw troop numbers, is what truly decides modern conflicts in this new era. Share this video with someone who needs to understand just how connected these seemingly separate events really are beneath the surface. And subscribe right now, because what happens next in this unfolding story is still being written in real time, and you'll want to be here when the next chapter reveals itself. What if the moment everyone feared in the Persian Gulf had already happened, and most people didn't even notice it unfolding right in front of them? Before we go further, smash that like button right now, because the next several minutes will explain something most news channels are getting completely wrong. Subscribe if you want the full picture, not just the headline, and share this with someone who still thinks this conflict is far away from touching their daily life. Let's dig in properly. For weeks, tension had been quietly building across the Persian Gulf, the kind of tension that rarely makes it into a 5-minute news segment but shapes everything that follows. American intelligence agencies had been tracking unusual movement near Iran's border with Iraq, watching patterns shift day by day. Columns of armored vehicles belonging to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps were gathering in ways that suggested something more than routine exercises. They were repositioning, regrouping, preparing for something bigger than a show of force. Meanwhile, state television inside Iran had grown louder and more aggressive by the day. Officials promised that American forces stationed in the region would be swept away entirely, that any Western presence nearby would pay an unbearable price. It looked, on the surface, like familiar posturing, the kind of loud rhetoric that usually fizzles out before anything actually happens. But this time felt different, even to seasoned observers watching from a distance. Iran appeared to believe the world's attention was focused elsewhere, distracted by shipping routes, oil tankers, and economic headlines, rather than paying close attention to what was quietly building near Kuwait. That assumption turned out to be a serious miscalculation, one that would define everything that happened over the following days. Because what Iranian forces encountered when they finally pushed forward wasn't hesitation. It wasn't confusion or delay. It was one of the most technologically overwhelming responses this region has witnessed in years, executed by United States Central Command with a level of precision that caught almost everyone off guard, including analysts who had been tracking the buildup closely. On the 11th consecutive night of heightened operations, the uneasy quiet of the Gulf finally broke apart completely. Aircraft carriers that had been sitting offshore, appearing calm and almost passive, suddenly transformed into centers of intense coordinated activity. F-18. Super Hornets began taking off into the darkness one after another, their engines tearing through the night sky with a sound that carried for miles. This wasn't a random show of force meant to intimidate from a distance. It was a calculated surgical operation designed to send an unmistakable message to everyone watching. Near the coastal area, around Bandar-e-Bushehr, American forces struck a power substation, a facility located just a short distance from Iran's only operating nuclear plant. Let's slow down here and think carefully about what that specific decision actually meant, because the location wasn't chosen by accident. Striking a substation that close to a nuclear facility without ever touching the reactor itself was a deliberate demonstration of restraint combined with overwhelming capability. It showed that American forces could cut off critical energy infrastructure supporting the regime's operations while completely avoiding any risk of a radioactive incident. It was a message delivered in the coldest, most calculated terms possible. We can reach exactly where we want, precisely how we want, without ever losing control of the outcome or the consequences. What followed in the hours after was a coordinated wave of strikes against radar. Installations and aircraft hangars scattered across the region, dismantling much of the confident rhetoric Iranian officials had been broadcasting just days earlier. The level of tactical embarrassment this caused for Tehran was significant, and it revealed something important about how badly Iranian leadership had misjudged the situation from the very beginning. Just days before this operation unfolded, Iranian forces had made a mistake that seems almost hard to believe in hindsight. They had posted a propaganda video online showing off what they clearly believed was a secret. Underground drone base meant to intimidate observers and project overwhelming strength to the world. Within hours of that video circulating, American analysts had identified the exact location using nothing more than the footage itself. By the next morning, that same facility was engulfed in flames. It was a clear, almost humiliating demonstration that in this new era of warfare, there are very few places left to hide, especially when your own side hands over the coordinates through careless, boastful propaganda. To really understand how the United States is able to move with this kind of speed and precision, we need to look much closer at the technology actually driving these operations behind the scenes. What flies over the Middle East today isn't just traditional military aviation from decades past. It's a fusion of human instinct and artificial intelligence working together in real time, faster than any previous generation of warfare could have imagined. At the center of this capability sits the F-18 Super Hornet, available in both single-seat and two-seat configurations, with the two-seat version carrying a dedicated weapons systems officer working alongside the pilot. This aircraft can weigh up to 29 tons at maximum takeoff and reach speeds close to Mach 1.8, tearing through the sky faster than sound itself. But raw speed alone isn't what makes it genuinely dangerous to an opponent. What matters most is its active electronically scanned array radar system. In practical terms, this means an American pilot can identify, track, and make a firing decision about a target before the opposing radar system even registers a signal on its own screen. In many cases, the target is functionally finished before its own operators even realize they've been located at all. And it would be a mistake to assume Iran is operating blindly out in the open desert. Intelligence assessments have confirmed that Iranian mobile radar units, the ones that emerge from hidden bunkers, fire on passing ships, and attempt to retreat quickly before being detected, are receiving updated targeting data from space using commercial satellite information sourced from China. This quiet, largely unspoken technological partnership between Chinese satellite data and Iranian military operations has forced American planners to adapt and innovate constantly, staying one step ahead of a system built on borrowed technology. Operating above all of this, in the upper layers of contested airspace, is the F-15E Strike Eagle, designed specifically to deliver heavy, precision-guided munitions capable of devastating, concentrated impact against hardened targets. But the real shift in this conflict, the quiet revolution reshaping how these operations actually unfold on a night-to-night basis, comes from a system built around collaborative combat aircraft working in tandem with human pilots. Iranian forces tried to outsmart this American technology by creating a heavy electronic jamming environment across the entire Persian Gulf, deliberately blocking GPS signals in an attempt to blind incoming guided weapon systems. The American response to This jamming was to introduce autonomous drone wingmen into the equation. Picture a drone that costs only a small fraction of what a fully manned fighter jet costs, essentially expendable by comparison, flying dozens of kilometers ahead of piloted aircraft, diving directly into the jammed, GPS-denied environment that would normally confuse traditional guidance systems entirely. Artificial intelligence takes over completely inside these forward drones. They handle reconnaissance duties, absorb and map out the electronic warfare interference, and relay exact targeting coordinates back to the human pilot waiting safely at a distance, far from immediate danger. The machine does the dangerous, exposed work of penetrating layered defenses. The human makes the final, deliberate call to engage. It's a partnership between silicon and instinct, and it's fundamentally changing the entire calculus of modern air warfare in ways most people watching the news haven't fully grasped yet. If this is the kind of story you want more of, take a second right now and hit subscribe, because we're only getting started, and the next part explains exactly why this entire situation escalated so suddenly and so violently. So why did this wave of overwhelming force get unleashed with such intensity, specifically on the 11th night, after 10 nights of comparative restraint? If we rewind the clock just 14 hours earlier, Iran had effectively ended any unofficial ceasefire that had quietly existed up to that point. They attempted to overwhelm Gulf defenses by launching coordinated swarms of drones and missiles toward Allied positions scattered across the region. Jordan was forced to intercept 8 out of 10 incoming projectiles cutting across its own airspace in a matter of minutes. Air raid sirens sounded across Bahrain without warning. Qatar had to activate its missile defense batteries in real time just to respond adequately to the sudden layered threat. But the true breaking point, the moment that changed everything, happened out at sea. A commercial vessel was struck without warning in the Strait of Hormuz, leaving 12 sailors injured, some seriously. That single moment, that spilled blood on a civilian ship, changed the entire framework of the conflict overnight. It was reported that direct instructions were given down the chain of command that any future attack on American forces or Allied assets would trigger a response roughly 20 times more severe than the original provocation itself. This new posture reflected a complete shift in political doctrine, one built around zero tolerance rather than the old model of measured, proportional responses. Iran had been operating under the long-standing assumption that any escalation on their part would be met with an equivalent, matching response from the other side. That assumption was shattered almost overnight through a public statement that redefined the rules of engagement entirely. The message delivered was short, direct, and left no room whatsoever for misinterpretation. From that point forward, any attack on a vessel in the Strait of Hormuz, whether carried out by missile or drone, would result in the deliberate destruction of critical infrastructure inside Iran itself, including targets located within the capital city. A strike at sea would now mean a corresponding strike on vital infrastructure back home. And here's why that particular distinction matters so much more than it might first appear. Why target bridges and power plants inside the heart of the capital instead of limiting responses purely to military targets near the border, where the fighting was actually happening? Wouldn't that seem more proportionate, more contained? The reasoning behind this dramatic shift becomes much clearer once you understand exactly who lives inside that capital city. It's where the regime's senior leadership resides, where top officials and military commanders enjoy relative comfort and insulation from the war's daily consequences that ordinary citizens face constantly. If the state's own leadership suddenly starts to feel the cold, the darkness, and the disruption inside their own private residences, the entire structure of authority built around them becomes far more fragile than it appears from the outside. The illusion of untouchable, insulated power starts to crack from within, not from external pressure alone. The contrast sitting at the heart of this conflict is genuinely striking once you look closely. While Iranian leadership reportedly moves towards safer, more protected locations and takes extraordinary precautions to avoid any personal risk to themselves, the regime simultaneously continues enforcing harsh, uncompromising measures against its own population back home. In the middle of active strikes lighting up the night sky, an Iranian court reportedly carried out swift, condensed legal proceedings, resulting in the execution of 2 young protesters. Officials appear entirely willing to enforce brutal consequences against their own citizens in order to maintain internal control, even while showing far more caution and hesitation when facing organized military resistance from an external, more powerful adversary.